And they forgot to read the newspaper because that was the day after Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And instead of the square in front of the courthouse being empty, they were having the Congress on Racial Equality was having a voter registration drive. So everybody saw the black limousine, black Cadillac, pull into the square, and the town marshal, John Manchester, went over there and said, "Let me see your ID." And the guy said, "I'm Clay Shaw from the International Trade Mart." And Lee Oswald gets out of the car and tries to register to vote. So we've got sworn congressional testimony putting Clay Shaw and Lee Oswald together in this town where they were murdering the prisoner in order to test the weapon.
Wow.
That's Nazi science.
Well, we know about Huntsville, Texas. It's now been admitted that for decades they've done testing, chemical, biological, on the state prisoners here in Texas. This is going on all over the place. And, of course, we have the real congressional report saying that it was a conspiracy with Kennedy, and then you have the separate whitewash Warren Commission that the mainstream media gives the attention. In the 10 minutes we've got left or so, obviously we could talk for hours about this amazing book. People should get it and read it, and I'm going to have you back on the radio to really break it down. Well, why is this so important for us today? I mean, obviously, if they had weaponized cancer that killed people in 28 days back in the 60s, imagine what they've got now with all the genetic technology.
Well, Alex, what Bernice Eddy, who was the vaccine safety tester at the National Institute of Health, tried to warn us about in 1959. She knew about the contamination of the polio vaccine, and she was trying to tell us there is going to be an epidemic of cancer in the United States. Now, my point is, we got back 15 cases of cancer per year for every case of polio. I mean, the cancer epidemic is more than 10 times the size of the polio epidemic, yet you never hear the word epidemic in the mainstream. Why not? Why was polio an epidemic at 50,000 cases a year and cancer not an epidemic at nearly 2 million cases a year? I mean, on September 11th, okay, we lost 3,000 people to terrorism. That same day, we lost more than 3,000 people to cancer. And every day since then, we have lost 3,000 people to cancer. I mean, we are now running at 1.5 million, 2 million since September 11th. No, I'm sorry. We're at 12 million now.
And let's be clear, the magnitude. The United States leads the world in cancer. It's clearly a large portion of it linked to these cancer viruses that they admit hundreds of millions of Americans were exposed to. And I've talked to scientists. They say, well, I saw it in CBS News last year. They're still giving people polio vaccines, oral and shot, that have it. This is not an accident. This is population reduction. I mean, this is amazing. And then the big Rockefeller foundations that own a lot of the big private hospitals and control the cancer industry, they make the money off treating it. And look, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, I've talked to top cancer doctors. When they were going to college, they would travel across the country to see a child with cancer. Now they're everywhere. I mean, this is Armageddon. This is a Holocaust.
Yes. And when you realize the polio epidemic in the first place was probably caused by the introduction of antibiotics in 1942, and they did not want to restrict the antibiotics and pull them off the market, so they pushed for a vaccine. So we got pushed into this whole thing by corporate money and greed in the first place, and we are now, I mean, this is not a political issue. Democrats don't want their kids to die any more than Republicans do, but we are looking at, in the United States, I mean, look around you, like, they're talking maybe 1 in 3 people will have cancer in their lifetime when it used to be like 1 in 10,000. I mean, this is the biggest mistake in the history of government. And this is killing more Americans than all wars we've ever been in combined times about 10.
But I guess at the end of the day, they always talk about how there's too many of us. From your deep research into this, we know this weapon program is going on. We know now they're coming out with vaccines that counter cancer viruses, but they never want to talk about the elephant in the room. Then the very cancer virus fighting vaccines end up causing problems and deaths as well. I mean, your best guess estimate, did this start as an accident or was it premeditated? And clearly they know what's going on today and are covering it up.
I think originally this was kind of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They found that when they discovered the cancer-causing virus, polyoma, they had already released 100 million doses, and they renamed it SV40. But they had 100 million in having been released and another 100 million sitting on the shelf. And from 1959 or so to 1963, they continued to release the next 100 million because they didn't want to stand up in front of the congregation and say, we just inoculated all your children with a cancer-causing virus. You know, I mean, there's 3 kids in my family. The other 2 have cancer. Okay.
Unbelievable. And your father, what did he think of all this?
Well, first of all, my father was not really into the cancer thing very much. He was an orthopedic surgeon.
He just knew her.
He knew her because they had both come to New Orleans at the same time. He was from Harvard. She was from the University of Chicago. And, of course, because they were both orthopedists, when they would go to their annual conferences and stuff, they would travel together. And one night she even came over to the house. They were entertaining the president of the Royal Academy of Orthopedic Surgeries, and she didn't want to be alone with the guy. And so she brought my father along with him, and they came back to the house. So I sat on her lap once as a child. I mean, that's how close this woman was.
Could you have ever imagined when you started your investigation that it would end there? A, and B, you talk about how she died, but get into specifics because that's intriguing in a macabre way.
Well, the public was told that she was found naked, stabbed 7 or 8 times, and set on fire in the bedroom of her apartment. Okay. They did not tell the public that her right arm was burned off. Okay, right arm and rib cage. I mean, the cops on the scene, I have all the documents, the autopsy, police reports, all that stuff. The cops on the scene say we could stand there and see her internal organs. Okay, now this is like not telling the public that Nicole Simpson's throat got cut. I mean, it's the main fact in the case. But they didn't want people going around uptown New Orleans looking for a machine that could have burned off Mary Sherman's arm. Because once you find that machine, which is at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital, and all this is happening the day the Warren Commission is doing their investigation into New Orleans, and they got these ID cards on Lee Oswald that came from that document, came from that facility. You see the problem?
Why would they want to kill her?
Well, I'm not sure that she was the target. I think if they wanted to kill her, they could have stuck a gun in her face or an ice pick in her head or something. There's lots of easier ways to kill people. Okay. What they wanted to do was to expose the research, the linear particle accelerator at the U.S. Public Health Service.
Oh, obviously, yes. I mean, why leave a woman half burned up in such a dramatic way? Somebody wanted to lead him back to that.
That's right, because they would have to say, why are you doing this? And the answer is because we just mass inoculated the American population with cancer-causing viruses.
Oh, so maybe this was some angry whistleblower then.
Well, who does the trail lead back to? It's Richard Nixon was in charge of this program that released the vaccine, okay? And he's running for president. So if you want to take out Richard Nixon, that's a good way to do it. If you want to show that Oswald's involved in the middle of this and he's trying to kill Castro, well, so much for Lone Nut, and there goes the Warren Commission, and there goes LBJ. So who's left standing?
Wow. Could it, or is some way been like good guy or some other bad faction?
It could be either one. But the point is, if Alton Ochsner himself, president of the American Cancer Society, had grabbed that handle instead of Mary Sherman, she was standing in front of the steel wall and it just blew out her arm like a spark plug. She was a widow who had no family in town. They got away with dragging her back to her apartment and faking a sex flashing. They would have had a really hard time doing that if Alton Ochsner had grabbed the handle. Okay, they were trying to get the attention to the linear particle accelerator to bring in the whole issue.
Oh, so she's killed there, and then somebody wanted to cover up that, brought it back to make it look like a slashing.
That's right. In fact, what happens is the electricity doesn't cross her heart. Okay, so it blows off her arm, but she's still alive. So somebody who's with her stabs her very carefully in the heart with a very slim medical instrument to terminate her. It's a mercy killing. Then they throw her in a body bag and they take it back to the apartment and they fake a murder scene. Okay. And I've got a memo now, and I got this up on my website that is from J. Edgar Hoover about the Mary Sherman murder. And he's telling his guys, do not investigate this murder under penalty of reprimand. And there's a little note on the second page, and the name is redacted, all right? But it says, right after saying her arm got burned off, says somebody's name was found in her address book. And it's 6 letters long with an apostrophe S, like OSWALD, okay? And I got 2 witnesses that saw Lee Oswald in Mary Sherman's apartment, okay? And witnesses who said Mary Sherman telephoned Lee Oswald. So we've got Lee Oswald wrapped up with this murder that all has to do with this cancer epidemic and the bioweapon. So can you imagine what Lee would have said if he had gotten into a courtroom in Dallas alive?
And he even came out and said, hey, I'm a patsy, I'm being set up.
That's right. And when you read Judith Ferry Baker's book, this Me and Lee book, where she was with Lee all summer, and they're talking on the telephone as the assassination's approaching. Lee tells her on July 29th, 1963, they're going to kill Kennedy and they're going to blame me.
Wow. Yeah, I know her story is very credible. We need to get her on as well. You know what? You're really at the focal point of so many things that intersect, a key juncture to understand what's happening in our society. I want to get you back on for a full hour or more to talk about your book. And perhaps you could just send me a list of documents or articles in the order that you think it's best for me to conduct the interview, so we can really go through all this, because there's so many facets to it. I know the book covers a lot of it, Dr. Mary's Monkeys. We've had your website up on screen, but what is the best website for folks to visit to learn more about this?
Well, it's Dr. Mary's Monkey, but you spell out the word doctor, DOCTOR, okay? And that's my website. I've got about 10 hours of video on it. That Maurice Hilleman video that you were talking about was there. Judith's videos there, witnesses, other documents, all that stuff. It's an in-depth thing. I'm going to have, for the next 5 days, I'm going to have a Alex Jones special on the book where your listeners can get signed copies for less than the Amazon price. But in the moment that's over, which would be about June 11th, we'll get, January 11th, excuse me. All the videos will be back up there.
Good. Well, I certainly want to get you back on to break all this down, because, I have children, I have a wife, my grandmother, everybody, and the cancer is up several thousand% depending on which type of cancer. There's no doubt this is happening. You've got documents here, with them weaponizing it. And it's so cold-blooded, we've got to turn this around, and we've got to educate people. The point you make about polio, and then they call it an epidemic, and this is something in the last 50, 60 years, 200, 300, 400, 500 times. I haven't done the math bigger. How much bigger is the cancer virus contamination, which they admit is taken all these rare cancers and made them very common? Do we have any number of how many people have died from these cancers? You'd have to add it all together.
Yeah, I figure it's about half of all the cases of cancer. The problem is that the SV40 is sexually transmitted. Okay, so you throw in the birth control pill and the freedom of the 60s and 70s, and you got this cross vector where everybody's getting this SV40 vaccine. The Italian studies on it, they found it in the semen of 45% of the otherwise healthy Italian males.
Oh, let's expand on that. I've seen numbers in India of 97% of the sewage in the countries has it in it. It's in the air, it's everywhere. Even if you haven't had the shot, it spreads.
And it's being transferred from generation to generation. We're now looking at grandchildren who have it in their blood because their grandmother or grandfather got the vaccine. This is a tragedy of biblical proportions, and it's going to change the shape of America and the shape of the planet, actually. And what's going on right now is they're just making money hand over fist